Hi, welcome back to our class. Now we're starting a brand new chapter. So, what's the idea behind the chapters in our course? Well, first we had the introductory chapters, didn't we? And now we have the chapters that are specific on blueprints. So, we've selected several different blueprints that are very useful and typical when it comes to ArcViz projects. And by using these blueprints, we're going to be showing you how we can apply the concepts behind creating them. At the same time, we want to be showing you the practical value of them. Okay. So we're going to be talking about theory, but also practical. We're going to explain the concepts so you can learn them yourself, and then you can put them into practice in whatever type of way that you choose. We don't really want to be too attached to a tutorial as such, where you just copy exactly what you see on screen. We want you to be able to learn the methods and the reasons for using these methods so that you can customize them in your own way. Okay, so that's the approach that we have behind our course, and we hope that you benefit from it. Especially when we understand what's happening, we can then decide, well, that's happening because of this. Now I can create something based on that knowledge. Okay, we find this a really useful way of teaching, and it's helped many to be able to improve in their abilities too. So now in this scene, in this chapter, we're going to talk about creating a door. Okay, so we're going to explain the nodes. We'll talk about the concept, particularly at this stage, of the box collision. Then we'll go a little bit deeper into the static mesh, and then we'll show you how we add in new components to the blueprint. We'll discuss vectors as well. So as we progress within the chapter, our knowledge will increase and we'll be able to understand exactly what we're doing. So let's talk about box collision. What is it and what we can do with it? So let's start by creating a new blueprint. So we'll choose to create an actor type blueprint. So what's this? Well, as you may have seen before, it's a type that you are able to add things to in your scene. So you can add the actor to your scene, and then you can add things to the actor. But it has to be in the scene for the programming to work, okay? And that's great for us because the majority of our blueprints are going to be actor types. So let's name this. We'll use BP_door concepts. And of course, you can name it any way that you choose to. Let's open it up. So here we have our basic blueprint, okay? So let's add a collision box here. And you might be asking, well, what is a collision box? Well, simply, it's an element that has no visual functionality, but it's a reference to an area in our scene. So a reference of an area in our scene that captures everything that clashes within it. So it's a reference, okay? In 3ds Max, you might call it a dummy. So it has no functionality. It can't be seen in the scene. It doesn't interact with other objects. But what it does do is it detects collisions. So let's click add box collision. And we'll leave it as a box. And this is it. We see it here. And we can rename it if we want to. Box collision. Nice. So this is our box collision here in our viewport. You can see it's an element that has dimensions and a location. So here it's always zeroed out in our axis to the center point. We have a location over here and dimensions with regard to the size, which by standard I believe is 32. Let's increase it to 150. So now it's a cube of 150 cubed. Nice. Technically, it's actually now sunk into the ground, isn't it? Because the center point is in the middle. So let's bring it up to the surface. Let's apply 75 to the location at Z. Sorry, we have to apply 150 because I increased the box size, didn't I? Now our box is sized at 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters. And the size here starts at 100. There's 150 to this side, 150 to that side, which equals 3 meters. So let's reduce it a bit, 75, which is what I wanted. And now we have a box of 1.5 meters cubed. And here I'll change the position to 75, which is the height from the center to the ground, okay? So now we've created our box collision. Let's compile and save it. And now let's add it to the scene so that we can see it. I'll delete this. Okay, so now let's add it to our scene. Just drag it in. I think that will do. Cool. So here we have it now. We can just take a look at it. So we can see the root is in the center, which is as we set it up. And we got the box showing as our reference, okay? Our box collision. So if we were to push play, you'll notice that you can't see it. It disappears. It's not visible to the player, but it is actually there. It doesn't affect the scene visually. It's purely a reference at this stage. But since we're studying, I want to show you something interesting. Since we're studying this component, let's make it appear so that we can find it in our scene. So let's make it visible. If you drag down a details panel, you'll find that there's an item here called hidden in game. See that here? So with it ticked, it means it's hidden. We set it to false. It should now appear. There we go. And this comes in handy when you're creating new things like this. It's easier for us to see it, even for us to be able to find the cube later on. It's a really nice way of being able to see what you're creating. So we've created our box collision. So what is the collision box? What does it do? Well, when something or anything clashes with it, it will move into this cube, right? It will, whenever something comes into the cube, it's detected. So now in our blueprint, it will just detect things, nothing else. But what we can do is we can create a function from it, and a really useful one for us. This function that we could create is just down here on the collision box. There are these details for the collision box here where you've got several different events. And this is when a component hits it. When it does, this happens. When this is for an overlap, when something goes into the box, then this event kicks into play. And when it's out of the box, it's not overlapping anymore. Okay, so when something goes in and comes out, different things happening. The beginning of an event and the end of an event. There are many events here, as you can see, that we can add, but we'll just stick to these ones for our door. Okay, just the overlap. If we click the plus sign, it's created a node to our event graph, which is when a component overlaps the collision box. Cool. So let's just rename this then. Rename it to our collision. And the name is changed here too. So this node is specifically for this collision box. If I had another collision box, I'd then be able to create another node here. And this would be between, I'll be able to add this event details to it. So let's go back to the viewport. If I click view, it will take me straight to where the node is. Now, why is that? Well, that's because I can't have two nodes with two events for the same action. When someone overlaps it, it's going to create an action, and you can't have two actions connected. Let me just delete this. There is another way that we can do this, just in case you want to use a different method. You can right click here and add an event. The same events will be here. And if I create it, it'll do the same thing. Okay, so it's up to you to choose which method you would prefer. I'll delete these now though, because we don't need them at this stage. Let's perform a test to see how it works. we'll use our well-known print string again. Just draw out from here to print string. Great. And I'm going to set it to 2 seconds. So it says hello and it's got 2-second duration here. That's it. So whenever something collides with it, it will print the word hello onto the screen for us. Make sense? Now let's compile and push play. So here we are with our character and we can go into the box. When we collide, you see that? It says hello in the top corner. Why is it showing 3 times though? Well, that's because our capsule has a rounded shape and sometimes it detects you more than once when you're moving in. So that's the reason for that. But basically, this is what's happening. It's showing up hello on screen just as I enter into the area. Cool. Now I'm going to show you the simulation we had mentioned in the beginning of the video. So to do that, I'll set this to the side a bit. Let's move that over here. So just so you can see what's going on. So here is our window. Here is the simulation, the blueprint. So you can see that is simulating as it's got a yellow border around it. So when I get into the box, see that? It creates these beams, doesn't it, from our event. So it's showing what's happening and where the event is going. It's really nice for us to be able to see it this way, especially when we're analyzing perhaps some complex blueprint. It's really useful. Okay, right. So that's been successful. So we've talked about the being overlapped event, but there is another one which is really useful, which is when it's done overlapping. So when we come to the end or when we come out. So let me just drag this over here and we'll use end overlap. There we go. So it's created another node for us. So let's suppose I will create another print string and I'll call it done. Okay. So what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is that when I'm done colliding with the box, it will show that message on the screen. So let's check this out. Let's move in. It says hello. I'm in the box. As I exit now, it says bye. Okay, hello and bye. You see that? Pretty cool, right? You're probably imagining what else you can do with this now. At this stage though, we've learned this and it's extremely useful. So where will we be using this in practice? In our door. When the character hits the collision box, it's then going to execute the open function. And when the character isn't colliding anymore, it will execute the close function. So this is what will happen. When we get through the door, it will open. Or when we go past the door, it will close. Okay? Awesome. Now, going through the box collision details, let's have a look at what we can do. So we have this section called collision here, and this is quite important, this part. Here we can control the collision details in quite some depth. Now, at the moment, this section, as you can notice, is not being used. It's disabled. However, we can enable it, but it's just disabled by default. And this item is always enabled when you create a box collision. And what does it do? Well, it tells Unreal that every time there is some overlapping going on, it will generate an overlapping event, which is this event right here. And this is an event, as we've mentioned in the beginning lessons. This is an event node. So when the character overlaps and it's entering an overlapping event, this is what's created, okay? And we can follow up on functions after that as well. We can add different things to it. So I've decided to comment on this just so we can understand the concepts behind it, okay? Because there is a chance in the future that you might find maybe you get into some problems in your collisions, in your blueprints. So just by talking about the concepts behind it should help you. Sometimes it's something really easy to work out if you do get into problems. But let's just perform a test. I'm just going to disable this and let's see what happens. I'm going to walk into it with my character. See, nothing happens now. So why is that? Well, we know the reason for that is because I've disabled it. So Unreal is no longer generating the event when I overlap the box. Pretty simple, right? So this is just a matter of enabling or disabling it. And you'll probably have this enabled, but there might be the odd occasion due to the settings of the collision that it's not being generated. Well, you can just come here and just check that it's ticked on or enabled. Maybe that's all it takes when you're searching throughout your blueprint, and you just need to know that, it could be that. One more thing we want to point out is regarding the collision presets. Now, Unreal brings us several pre-programmed settings to facilitate our collision settings. We can see them all listed here. But basically, what it does, which is really cool, is it can be controlled. We can control it here. Okay, so what it's doing is this section is telling Unreal which object we want to generate the overlapping. Okay, so which object generates full blockage where you can't go through, or which object or actor it should ignore that won't have an effect on the overlapping. So when I select these presets, all of these are off, but if I set it to custom, then they'll be available for me to use. Okay, so I can choose, for example, let's take a look. So these here, these tracing responses, I'll be able to see what's invisible or what's visible. So what will be invisible or visible, I can turn it on or off, whether that will affect the collision. Well, static, dynamic, pawn, physics, body, vehicle, destructible, projectile. So what does this tell us here? Well, it's generating overlapping events for all of these kinds of objects, but it's blocking the projectile one, right? So let's just put this into practice. As we know, I'm in the first person mode and I've got a gun which is enabled. So if I shoot it, see that? It shoots these balls, doesn't it? These tennis balls, and it's bouncing off the collision. So that's because I've set it to block. If I switch this to overlap, it should go right through the box. See that? So it just goes straight through, ignores it. Okay, cool. And you can see that at the top, it's giving us that message as well, isn't it? Hello and bye. So it's working out when something enters and leaves. Okay. Another option is to ignore it. So what I can do here is if I shoot the box, nothing's going to happen because I've ignored that here. Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? So a good thing to just be aware of. Here we can take control of what is affected in the collision. It's really useful actually, especially in ArcViz, for instance, when blueprints might interfere with one another. For example, if they're really close to each other, if it touches another and there might be a collision box within another blueprint, you don't really want to be setting one another off, do you? Just because you have to put them close for some reason. So it's a good thing to be aware of, because that could actually cause some issues, but at least now you understand how to work around it just by taking control of these elements. Let's set it back to block, because it won't make a huge difference to us since it's more often used in games. While static is used for static objects, since they don't move, it's unlikely that they're going to affect the overlap. So that's cool. And here there is the world dynamics, which are objects of the world, but they are dynamic, so the ones that move. And it's important that we have this in mind, we consider it, because, well, for example, here there is this detail here that we can use to define for Unreal which object it is. Okay, so for instance, this collision box is a world dynamic type of object. So as far as we're concerned, it won't make a big difference in our scene and how we're working. But let's suppose, for example, this box here, let's see if it's collision, what type it is. Okay, so type of collision, this is a physics body type of object. So it's a physical body. So once we check our collision, here is physics body. There we go. So it generates overlapping to our collision box. Is it really going to happen? Well, let's test it. So what I'll do is I'll add our box close to it so it's a bit easier. And then push play. Let's see if it works. There we go. It works perfectly. Cool. Just push it there. Nothing happens. It went through, didn't it? And there we go. But nothing's happened. So let's analyze the detail here. Let's take a look. So let's jump back in. So we have our box, which is the physics actor type. But there is a technical detail that I've mentioned before, which is here at generate overlap events. It's disabled, isn't it? Remember? So it doesn't generate overlapping events for us. So let's see if it works now. Let's just go back around this way. Just fire the box. See? Hello popped up. I tried to point it, but I can't obviously because I'm in first person. But you can see it, right? So hello and bye are working now. It's generating the overlapping. From now on though, it means that we are able to interact with any object as a scene overlap. Okay, so let's perform a few more tests so we can really understand what's going on here. Let me select physics body on the collision box. Physics body, okay. So I'm going to ignore it. Let's try again. Okay, do you see that? Nothing happens. It just ignores the overlap. I'm going to change the type here. Let's set it to custom. And now I'm going to set it for set it to world dynamic. And let's press play. And let's see if it's still going to move once it's shot. Yes, there it is. Do you see it? It now activates it. The shot's blocked. Let me see. Look, see? And bye popped up as well because it's moved out of the collision. And that's exactly what I want to show you, just to provide you with some supplementary examples. And we can have greater control over collisions. Sometimes we can even add all these different settings here. So in various ways, let's suppose we want only the character to interact, right? Well, in case that's what we want, this can be a really useful tool to be able to enable. Maybe we don't want to have to ignore anything, or all we have to do is then limit the collision on our character. So if we don't want to ignore everything, then we can adjust some settings there, can't we? Now, one thing I would like to mention regarding these settings here is if you click this, it will select or ignore all the items. Here it allows overlapping in all of them, and here it blocks all of them. Okay, so if, for example, I want only our character to interact, and what's our character? It's a pawn. So this object class is a character one. So for games, this will work for the first or third person character, or any other characters. The opponents in case of games, they will be characters as well. So the opponents in games will be pawns too. So it's this whole class of characters that will be affected in this section. However, since we're working just in ArcViz, we'll always have only one character, won't we? No more than that. So we can just ignore all items and only enable the pawn. So let's actually see if this works. So I'm walking up here. It's enabling this box. So our first person works, right? So as So as the box is working too, you can see that the bullet's going through since it's ignored all the items. So my collision box will only interact with our first person. Okay. So I felt it was quite important to just explain the features of the collision box for us. It's really useful for us and helpful that we can perform tests like this. But there are, as I say, many features here that we use for games. But for ArcViz, some of these details will be enough. We won't need all of them, but it's just good to know, isn't it? Just in case we work with something a little bit more elaborate, something a bit more creative, okay? Now, if we want a door or any element in our scene to react, to open, and it affects the collision box or another element, or maybe an object that's mobile, like a car, I don't know, just as an example. Well, we have so many options here, don't we? We can have even characters as well, like metahuman characters from Unreal who can move within our scene. And then what we can do is we can allow them as a pawn to interact or not interact with the collisions. So it's all part of this category. So that's why I just included those examples in it. So it may be able to, your character might be able to open doors. They might not be able to, but it's all dependent on what it is you're trying to achieve. So you can explore some very creative solutions yourself now that you understand better the features here within the collision box. Let me show you another interesting feature now then, not only for collision boxes, but for any blueprint, in fact. Here we have our viewport where we can resize our cube, as you can see up here. We can move it or whatever we want, really. But one very interesting feature, and one that we can use quite often when we want to customize our blueprints or use it more than once in the same scene, is this. For example, let's go to the details panel here. Okay, and here you can see that when you select a blueprint, our hierarchy can be seen here, can't it? The same one that you see over here is also in the same setup. So why is that good? Well, that means that we can alter it, doesn't it? So let's suppose that I want to resize the cube. I want to make it bigger. Well, I can do that just here. So I can enlarge the collision box in my viewport, and it's going to alter it right before me. But if you go to the blueprint, it looks the same. And this is good because maybe you've got two blueprints. Let's suppose we make a copy of this blueprint. Let's Alt and drag to make a copy. There we go. Just wait a second. Select blueprint, copy here through the same blueprint. Okay. There we go. So we've got a duplicate now. So I can have different size components now, can't I? So maybe you've got one door blueprint, or maybe you've got something else, depending on how much room you've got. You might decide that you want to make this collision slightly larger so that it can be detected from a longer distance or shorter distance, depending on the setup that you've got. So let me just add a new one. And let me just copy, I'll copy one more. Okay, cool. So if I resize it through the blueprint itself in the blueprint viewport and compile and save, and then jump back to the editor, see what's happened? So it's adjusted the others. Sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you only want to resize the collision box, not on all of them and not at the same time. So once you add the actor to the scene, you can make these changes through here, okay, in the details panel.